those LLMs are trained on enormous amounts of text, basically the entirety of all publicly available text on the internet, right? That's typically on the order of 10 to the 13 tokens. Each token is typically 2 bytes. So that's 2 10 to the 13 bytes as training data. It would take you or me 170,000 years to just read through this at 8 hours a day. So it seems like an enormous amount of knowledge, right, that those systems can accumulate. But then you realize it's really not that much data. If you talk to developmental psychologists, and they tell you a 4-year-old has been awake for 16,000 hours in his or her life. And the amount of information that has reached the visual cortex of that child in 4 years is about 10 to the 15 bytes. And you can compute this by estimating that the optical nerve carry about 20 megabytes per second, roughly. And so 10 to the 15 bytes for a 4-year-old versus 2 times 10 to the 13 bytes for 170,000 years worth of reading. What that tells you is that through sensory input, we see a lot more information than we do through language. And that despite our intuition, most of what we learn and most of our knowledge is through our observation and interaction with the real world, not through language. Everything that we learn in the first few years of life, and certainly everything that animals learn, has nothing to do with language.
So it'd be good to maybe push against some of the intuition behind what you're saying. So it is true there's several orders of magnitude more data coming into the human mind, much faster, and the human mind is able to learn very quickly from that, filter the data very quickly. Somebody might argue your comparison between sensory data versus language, that language is already very compressed. It already contains a lot more information than the bytes it takes to store them if you compare it to visual data. So there's a lot of wisdom in language. There's words and the way we stitch them together. It already contains a lot of information. So is it possible that language alone already has enough wisdom and knowledge in there to be able to, from that language, construct a world model, an understanding of the world, an understanding of the physical world that you're saying LLMs lack?
So it's a big debate among philosophers and also cognitive scientists, like whether intelligence needs to be grounded in reality. I'm clearly in the camp that yes, intelligence cannot appear without some grounding in some reality. It doesn't need to be, physical reality. It could be simulated, but the environment is just much richer than what you can express in language. Language is a very approximate representation of our percepts and our mental models, right? I mean, there's a lot of tasks that we accomplish where we manipulate a mental model of the situation at hand, and that has nothing to do with language. Everything that's physical, mechanical, whatever, when we build something, when we accomplish a task, a motor task of, grabbing something, etc., we plan our action sequences, and we do this by essentially imagining the result of the outcome of a sequence of actions that we might imagine. And that requires mental models that don't have much to do with language. And that's, I would argue, most of our knowledge is derived from that interaction with the physical world. So a lot of my colleagues who are more interested in things like computer vision are really on that camp, that AI needs to be embodied, essentially. And then other people coming from the NLP side, or maybe some other motivation, don't necessarily agree with that. And philosophers are split as well. And the complexity of the world is hard to imagine. It's hard to represent all the complexities that we take completely for granted in the real world that we don't even imagine require intelligence, right? This is the old Moravec paradox from the pioneer of robotics, Hans Moravec, who said, how is it that with computers, it seems to be easy to do high-level complex tasks like playing chess and solving integrals and doing things like that, whereas the thing we take for granted that we do every day, like, I don't know, learning to drive a car or, grabbing an object. We can do with computers. And, we have LLMs that can pass the bar exam. So they must be smart. But then they can't learn to drive in 20 hours like any 17-year-old. They can't learn to clear up the dinner table and fill up the dishwasher like any 10-year-old can learn in one shot. Why is that? Like, what are we missing? What type of learning or reasoning architecture or whatever are we missing that basically prevent us from having level 5 self-driving cars and domestic robots?